Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is February 7th, 2019, and this is episode 124. Politicos is the BC Politics Podcast. Tell us what you think of the show by leaving us a review or get at us on social media. Most importantly, help us build the show by throwing us a couple bucks a month at patreon.com/politicos.
I'm Scott Lindboom.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. On today, we're going to talk about how much money, and more importantly, how much data all BC's political parties have, and whether Jody Wilson-Raybould lost her job for going after SNC Lavalin. Engineers and corruption is apparently the theme of today. Politicos is in partnership with BC Today, British Columbia's daily newsletter dedicated exclusively to BC politics. Sign up for a free trial to have unique coverage of the BC legislature delivered in your inbox every morning. Listeners to Politicos enter the offer code CITIZEN for access to a special rate. For your free 2-week trial of the newsletter, go to britishcolumbiatoday.ca. And the next 2 weeks are the throne speech and the budget, so I imagine there'll be lots of great coverage, so why not get your newsletter? Let's kick it off by talking cash or data check. The final half of 2018 fundraising data is out for all of BC's major political parties, and everyone's pulling in some money, but not as much as they used to. Seems like the Wild West days are over.
Yeah, so in this case, they pulled somewhere between $435,000 for the Green Party, up to $2.05 million for the NDP. This was in the last half.
Yeah, the Liberals were right in the middle at $1.7 million, so they were behind the NDP, and this follows a similar trend to what happened in the first half of 2018. On top of that, the three parties are all getting their per-vote subsidy top-up that the NDP introduced with some controversy as a way to mitigate the donation changes. But it seems like all the parties desperately need money because they're dropping from the tens of millions they raised in 2017 to the ones of millions they raised this last year. And so the top-up is about $373,000 for the Greens and about $900,000 for both the Liberals and the NDP, bringing their grand total income essentially for the last year, in addition to any, merch sales or whatever else political parties make a little bit of money off of, to $1 million for the Greens, $3.25 million for the Liberals, and $4.2 million for the NDP. There's a good breakdown out there that the NDP's donations largely came from a mix of those donating over $250 and those donating under, whereas the Liberals got almost all of their money from people maxing out their donations, so they had fewer donors donating more, and the Greens really relied on those small donations. One of the interesting things that I was pointed to is if you actually take these income numbers and then go back and look at the annual reports that the parties all filed last year for 2017, you can kind of get a sense of how much cash each has in the bank. Like, if an election were to happen, what's their war chest? And for the BC Liberals, it turns out it actually looks pretty bad. Now, we'll get the 2018 annual reports in March at some point, and we might have to revisit this. But if you'll bear with the podcast math for a second, going through the BC Liberals annual report, and I'll put the link in the show notes, it's several thousand pages because it includes the names of all the donors. Their accumulated surplus, that is all their assets minus their liabilities for 2017, was $237,000 only. And of that, $206,000 is basically fixed assets, so not cash, which means they didn't actually have much cash coming out of 2017. So you can take the additional, $3 million, and that's maybe what they're sitting on.
Yeah, now it wasn't election year, so they did probably spend down a huge amount of it trying to get elected.
Yeah, the party had expenses in that year of almost $22 million, and overall in 2017 ran a deficit of $7.4 million. And they did also run not just an election, but a leadership race. And so those things cost money.
Yeah. And a lot of that was, I think, stockpiled from previous years. They built up the election war chest over a couple of years of fundraising.
And on the other side of the aisle, the NDP's 2017 accumulated surplus, those assets minus their liabilities, was about $2.6 million, an order of magnitude larger. And they similarly only had about $200,000 in fixed assets, which means they potentially went into 2018 with over $2 million in cash. And then you add the $4 million they raised, suggests they're in a pretty healthy state. Now, the NDP also had expenses in 2017 of $15 million, but on their income statement, they, unlike the Liberals, didn't lose money in 2017. They actually netted $820,000. So overall, the NDP came out of 2017 in a pretty good fiscal situation, and then followed that by raising more money than the BC Liberals, who
and
potentially have none.
Yeah, a lot of that is also that money follows success in politics as much as the reverse happens. So, if you form government, it tends to help your fundraising numbers.
Which is all to kind of suggest that things are not in a great spot for the BC Liberals. Now, they probably also spent a lot of money in this last year on the electoral reform referendum because they were steadfastly opposed to that, and it seems like that paid off for them. We don't know yet how much any of them spent. Maybe the NDP didn't spend their cap. We'll find out when we get the annual reports. We'll also have to expect that both parties will have significantly lower expenses because it's not an election year, and also they don't have the income to support $15 million operations anymore. But it's a new era, essentially, for politics in BC. And I don't think we're going to see this really shake out for a while, but the initial indication is things can't be like they were. I mean, everyone can pretend for a few more weeks, but the piggy bank's running dry.
Yeah, and I think you'll see the Liberals, in particular, try to move to more of the small, regular donor model of fundraising, which has its drawbacks because you tend to need to make your base constantly angry to get that to work. So, it has some potential implications for the broader political discourse.
Yeah, this is something the federal Liberals actually ran into after Chrétien banned corporate union donations, is their party essentially sank because they just didn't have the money to keep running a professional operation. And it took them 3 elections to figure that out.
Yeah, because the old school Liberals would basically go up and down Bay Street and collect a bunch of money from the same 12 people, whereas you couldn't really do that, and the Conservatives figured out that small donor return fundraising model a lot quicker.
And I guess the BC Liberals were just going up and down Alberni, and now they need to find a different street. Main Street, I guess. Small town.
They're not doing that well in Mount Pleasant.
No.
So, I think more Dunbar would be their street.
Well, I'm thinking once you get into the interior, that's where the BC Liberal strongholds are. And
also that.
Start talking up those donors. But to make that small fundraising model work of lots of individual donors, one of the best ways to do it is to get lots of data on people and micro-target them, which is actually what both of the parties have been doing, actually all 3, according to the Information and Privacy Commissioner, who has released a damning report on all 3 political parties, condemning them for basically profiling everyone in the province and not being very secure with your data. This report is up on the office's website, and we'll throw that in there. It includes 17 recommendations, but there's a whole litany of findings first, 25. And these range from, some are actually pretty good, that the parties recognize that they do have to at least follow the Privacy Act and protect people's data, but they're not doing it great. And one of the things that pops out in finding 4 is the Liberal Party specifically has apparently a practice of collecting personal information from third parties from other members of their household. So every political party during a campaign goes door to door, says, "Hi, who are you voting for?" Blah, 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 write some stuff down.
These days, I think they mostly punch into a nap, but
yeah.
Elections are a huge data operation as much as a send out your message to people operation.
And so you always want to know who are your voters, where do they live, so when it's election day, you can get them out. But what it turns out the Liberals specifically were doing is looking through the window, or when they were talking to someone going, "Oh, I see 3 other people there," and noting that down, and maybe even noting some other physical characteristics like gender or ethnicity. And that's not allowed. Actually, you're not allowed to write anyone's gender or ethnicity down unless they say, yes, you can say, "I'm a white man." And so the Liberals got in a bit of trouble for that, but that doesn't really authorize anyone because all of them were guilty at some level of trying to collect third-party information or otherwise be a little fast and loose with data consent.
Yeah, for example, Finding 7 points out that both the Liberals and the NDP were collecting third-party personal information over telephone canvassing.
The other big thing they find is there were a lot of uses of petitions, online petitions, be outraged about this, sign a petition, and we'll...
Evenly, sign for someone's, I think I saw the Liberals recently was a, wish Andrew Wilkinson a happy 1 year as a leader thing.
And what the Privacy Commissioner points out is, yes, you can do this, but then you can only communicate with the people on that issue unless you've been very explicit that by signing this, we will email you every day about giving us $3, or sometimes multiple times a day when a fundraising deadline's coming up. All the parties were also implicated in pulling in a lot of social media data, whether it's just likes on a Facebook page, and some of that is okay, it's implied, but in other cases, it's not. And having used systems like Nation Builder, I can understand the, mid-level staffer or lower who doesn't actually realize how much these systems are designed to just bring in automatically. It actually takes effort to not kind of pull in everyone's data.
Yeah, if a Twitter account gets linked to the Nation Builder thing, it'll automatically pull the profile information from anyone who likes any tweet on that account. That's just the default, and pretty much every campaign runs on Nation Builder or an equivalent these days.
So I don't know that this was all out of malice or some nefarious thing. There's some attempt to connect it to the Cambridge Analytica stuff.
But a lot of this is just if you've ever done anything in politics with data, it's not all that surprising. It should obviously be a lot more regulated and kept on track of than it is, but the basic, we're going to collect as much data as we can is entirely unsurprising.
Yeah. And to their credit, all political parties have privacy policies in place, but what's not so good is they tend to define their terms differently than the Act. They tend to have giant inadequacies. They don't train anyone properly in how to be, careful with people's data. And when you bring on a lot of volunteers who might get access to, long lists of phone numbers, addresses, and maybe even more sensitive information.
Oh, yeah. I've definitely heard that there are just old lists from parties just floating out there that you have any connection you asked around, you can get your hands on pretty much. And it's the sort of thing that definitely needs to be done better. But just local election here, I remember there's issues around whether or not Kennedy Stewart was taking his federal NDP list and using it for his local election here.
It gets complicated. From the outside, it seems very simple, you should protect people's data. But once you're in a campaign, or even a small nonprofit, frankly, the kind of, can I just email your people to do this is almost like people's natural inclination. And they just kind of forget that we have these laws that set out what you can and can't do with information. And people need to be a lot more careful, especially political parties who are at a core of our democracy.
Yeah, and as we kind of talked about a bit last week, the federal security stuff, is that parties generally don't put a huge amount of their infrastructure into protecting the data. A lot of effort into collecting it, but when it comes down to it, if the choice is between trying to collect a bit more data or trying to protect the data you do have, they're going to side with the one that will maybe get them a couple more votes.
Well, and that's the other thing to tie that back to the first half of our conversation here, is that if the parties have less money, and now they're being told to put a bunch more of their resources into protecting the little data they have, and the data they have is so vital to a modern, effective fundraising campaign, puts a lot of sort of constraints around how our political parties are going to be able to operate. And that's not to say they should be allowed to go free, but political parties are a core of our democracy, and you can love independence all you want, but the core of the political debate is framed by the NDP, Liberals, and Greens to some extent. And now if they're, all focused on internal administration, sign up and become a member of your favorite political party because they need some money. Of course, they're also doing bad things with your data, so maybe expect better. I would not want to be the staff of any of these political parties right now. Not a good week for them. Yeah, so the specific recommendations from the Privacy Commissioner include things like providing a succinct, simple explanation for why you're gathering information and what you're going to do with it. Obviously, only collecting information, particularly from social media, that you need and that you have consent for. just being more transparent, like, why are you collecting this data? Do you need it? What are you going to do with it? When will you delete it? Because a lot of these policies don't actually have deletions, it's unless they're requested. And so they may have your data for decades.
And when, volunteers are around, they might hold on to the data too. Like, I gather that's how a few of those lists have kind of gotten out there.
And then the final thing that came up is Facebook does have an advertising tool that lets you upload a list of emails so that it can look for people like those. And this is really helpful if you're an advertiser because you want to
Or even just like deliberately target those particular people with Facebook ads.
Exactly. It's a valuable tool that makes sense, but it's also something that, if I sign a petition for the NDP, I have not said to the NDP, you can give my email to Facebook, even though Facebook already has my email. And no one was sort of asking for that extra level of permission. So Facebook was getting people's data that they didn't have permission for. And so the privacy commissioner says, don't do that. Simply get that extra consent. I guess we'll expect to see a lot more privacy policy updates from the political parties. It's going to be a big year for privacy and freedom of information request changes, I think, as we come up on the throne speech.
And in that vein, it looks like the legislature might finally come under the Freedom for Information Act.
Yeah, this is sort of a update to the Plecas controversy watches. I guess we should stop calling it the Plecas controversy. It's more the speaker, or it's more the clerk and sergeant at arms ongoing scandals.
I feel like it needs a gate, like wood splitter gate or something.
That just sounds like you can split a gate in addition to wood or logs. Anyway, the privacy commissioner, together with the BC ombudsperson and the merit commissioner.
Apparently there's a merit. I admit I just learned there was a merit commissioner.
Well, they tag teamed together for a combined letter outlining a long list of recommendations to improve transparency and accountability at the legislature. Things like extending FOI requests to internal legislature stuff, whistleblower protections, the usual gamut of cleanup corruption. Unsurprisingly, that was quickly endorsed by the NDP, and Mike Farnworth promised legislation will be coming very soon. Plecas's office also endorsed it. The Liberals had dropped a 20-point, quote, ethics plan just prior to the joint ombuds privacy merit commissioner letter. So I suspect it to be a very uncontroversial set of, I guess, Bill 1 of 2019. Maybe it'll be Bill 2 or 3.
I think Bill 1 is typically some procedural thing, like reaffirm loyalty to Her Majesty or something like that. Oh, no, it's Parliament's
Supremacy.
Supremacy.
It'll be Bill 2 then. But I guess if we're talking the ongoing controversies there, we should note that both the clerk Craig James and Gary Lenz, the former sergeant or on-leave sergeant-at-arms, have put out their responses to Plecas's report.
Well, they filed them and put out a letter basically saying, yeah, we filed these and we didn't do anything wrong. But the details are in the report to Lamsey.
And we hope Lamsey makes that public, which I can't imagine they wouldn't now, because you can't just put out the allegations of one side and not give the others. Like you said, both deny any wrongdoing. I think Lenz specifically cites the emotional distress caused by this ongoing controversy against him and his family, which I don't doubt is real. Being put on leave and kind of dragged through the mud over months, and then having the allegations in Plecas's report thrown against you, even if they're true, doesn't make you look good. So we'll look forward to reading those when they come out. Although if all they say is, we followed the letter of the law, we got things signed off when we needed to, you can't fault us for following the rules. It's not going to look great.
We're on to segment 2, So Not Corruption at Lavalin.
Get it? Because SNC. We're moving from one segment which ended on corruption in BC to one that's about corruption, I'm going to say, in Quebec, across
Ottawa,
Canada.
Libya. It's really a global bit of corruption.
Yeah. So tell me about this Globe and Mail story.
This morning, the Globe broke a story citing anonymous sources in the government that the former Attorney General, Jody Wilson-Raybould, was pressured by the Prime Minister's office, or someone there, wasn't entirely clear, to basically drop criminal charges against SNC Lavalin, engineering giant out of Quebec.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, rolling back the tape a little bit, on Friday, the former CEO of SNC Lavalin, Pierre Duhaime, pled guilty. He said, breach of trust, and got 20 months house arrest, 240 hours community service, and has to give $200,000 to victims of crime. He had 14 other charges against him, including forgery, conspiracy, and fraud, but I guess they were willing to, get him on this one. He's the fourth SNC Lavalin exec to plead guilty recently, which is not a good look for a company, and all of these are in connection with a contract to build a health center at McGill that cost $1.3 billion. This included in November former Vice President Norman Morin, who pled guilty to violating Canada's election financing rules for a scheme that got $117,000 donated to the Liberals and Conservatives, which corporations aren't allowed to give money to candidates, so that's dodgy.
SNC Lavalin has a fairly long and storied career of questionable activities surrounding kind of greasing the wheels. So this is just the latest.
Yeah, so we have all these charges come out. The Globe and Mail story is basically that someone in the PMO didn't want these latest round of charges to go forward.
Yeah, so specifically these were in relation to alleged bribes to the former Libyan government headed by Muammar Gaddafi. And there were charges in relation to fraud and corruption connected with $48 million in payments to public officials in Libya.
And defrauding Libyan organizations of $130 million,
Yes, bribing Gaddafi is just one of those things that's a really bad look and companies should not be doing.
Trudeau denies everything, categorically. He came out pretty strongly after this Globe and Mail story. Jody Wilson-Raybould has been unavailable for comment today. Maybe by the time you listen, she'll have said something, but
she did say something earlier. It was, I can't recall the exact quote, but it was basically along the lines of, I'm the government's former lawyer and will not be discussing the matter, which isn't the sort of thing you generally say when the story is false. And that's the interesting bit in this, is how the government has reacted, with Trudeau and the Liberal line basically being, no one was directed to let SNC Lavalin off the hook, but that wasn't really the allegation. It was that there was pressure being applied. So there was kind of a very technical non-denial on the part of the Liberals, and then just no denial at all, a no comment from the former Attorney General. But most interestingly is the former Attorney General part of this.
Well, just to pause for a second and just iterate, I guess, the Attorney General is a very unique cabinet position in that it has to be fully independent from the rest of the government on really anything involving the prosecution of justice. And so for the government in any way, other members, to be trying to exert any influence, even allegedly, on this office is a huge issue, right? This is, do we have rule of law? Do we have a fair and balanced trial? Or are political favors being exchanged and political pressure being applied to give extra room for the Prime Minister's friends and extra pressure on his enemies? Now, it's all allegations. Trudeau's denied everything. But what has been rumored is that there was not a great relationship between Jody Wilson-Raybould and Justin Trudeau on a number of issues. This hadn't been mentioned until today, but her demotion or transfer to another office sort of fits a pattern now.
Yeah, it also explains the rather curious letter that she put out shortly after she left. I think we pointed out at the time, it was a little odd that she said she didn't have much to say on the matter and that put out this 1,000-word document. But most interesting in that was that she highlighted the independent role of the Attorney General and how it was kind of one of her key bits of pride in her work there. was keeping it independent, which is very interesting subtext now that we see what's being alleged here.
And this story is really just breaking, like today. That
came out this morning.
Yeah, it's probably going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And hell,
I'm not sure if it does get better. Like this is the Prime Minister's chief of staff cutting a check to a sitting senator is not nearly as bad as this is if it's true.
I was going to say, this is the kind of corruption story you expect after like 3 or 4 terms, not toward the end of your first. Again, alleged, but it didn't come out of nowhere?
Yeah. The Globe's a serious journalistic outlet. They're not going to just go off half-cocked on this.
I don't know where it goes next. Parliament's back in setting, so we're going to see a lot of angry NDP and Conservative questions. I know Charlie Angus at the NDP has already called on the federal government to not give any more contracts to SNC Lavalin.
Well, that's...
that was even before this.
Yeah, and that's the interesting other part, well, one of the many interesting aspects of this is that before this basically let off the hook, which was a deferred prosecution system, which, by the way, the Liberals basically just traded last year, and there was a suspicion at the time might have been to let SNC have an easier out on this. So this is a new creation of the Trudeau government that there might be being pressured now to have happen. And the SNC case is that, well, if they are actually convicted on this, they can't bid on government contracts, which for a major engineering firm is bad, really bad. And that would potentially put a lot of people out of work. And that's been kind of the line on this from them.
Well, we have to keep building light armored vehicles because the jobs, and we have to keep working with the
different company.
Well, no, I know it's a different company. I'm just saying here we have to keep working with essentially the mafia engineering firm, alleged, don't sue me, other than all the execs who've been arrested for corruption because of the jobs. It's not great. I mean, SNC Lavalin, I don't have all the details before, but I know I believe they played a pretty big role in the Charbonneau report when Quebec did its big public inquiry into corruption. None of this feels like it's surprising, but it's bad when it comes out. It's a sort of situation where the federal government looked at BC's corruption and goes, we can beat that. Hold my beer.
No, but this, I think, will definitely plague the government for quite a while, and it's the sort of thing that can bring down governments, is this level of interference in prosecution and corruption.
Especially when it comes out in an election year?
Yeah, like this is early enough that if nothing else breaks on this, it probably won't affect things that much. But, if we get a trickle of stories over the next few months, it could really jeopardize the Liberals' chance of re-election.
Well, and we're still expecting more to come out on the Admiral Norman trial.
Yes, that's also ongoing, and interestingly, I saw today that they signed the contract. That was one of the big shipbuilding contracts for $60 billion today with Irving. So,
Irving's another very reputable company.
So yeah, that probably isn't something we've heard the last of either.
Cool. Well, moving on to quick takes, while we're talking about an election year, guess who else has opinions about the election still? Thomas Mulcair. He's now in a CTV interview, because he's just doing the media circuits and just being a talking head now, saying things like, I think that Canadians might just send enough of a contingent of Green MPs to Ottawa this time to hold whoever would form the government, hold their feet to the fire on these environmental issues. Somewhat suggesting NDP voters are going to give up on Jagmeet Singh, go over to the Green Party, and there's going to be a giant Team Elizabeth May caucus there, which is a weird take for a former leader of the NDP, considering most former leaders of political parties tend to not go rabidly against their party.
Yeah.
I mean, that is kind of the standard for the NDP. Although usually they change their jersey first. I'm talking about Bob Rae or Ujjal Dosanjh or any number of others.
I'm not entirely sure he's wrong on this. Like, when we talked about the last time or maybe the time before that, it's hard to keep track where he was bad-mouthing the current leader. I mean, there was, I think, a reasonable point there, and this might be one here. I mean, Jagmeet Singh isn't wowing anyone as leader. Now, I don't think Elizabeth May has wowed anyone as leader outside the people who were, voting Green when it was an irrelevant third party without a seat. But the Greens overall have been doing well at various levels of government. There's now 3 Green city councillors here, 3 Green MLAs in Victoria. I think they've picked up seats in they have 1 seat in Ontario, I believe, and a couple in the Maritimes, maybe.
Yeah, nationally they're starting to build a profile.
So, there were 10 years ago, Greens just didn't get elected generally. That's changing, and I could see the Greens picking up a few more seats. Now, I don't think there's a huge growth potential under Elizabeth May for the federal Greens, but yeah, I could see some disappointed, particularly more environmentalist New Democrats, deciding to vote Green this election.
According to Eric Grenier's poll tracker, the Greens are at 7.4% in the polls right now. Over the past year and a half, 18 months or so, they have varied between 5% and 7.5%, which is not a very big range. Not the kind of range that nets you dozens and dozens of seats, because I believe they've hit 10% and not gotten a seat, so...
Yeah, I could maybe see them picking up a couple, 1 or 2 South Island seats, maybe.
He does give them a chance of winning between 1 and 5 seats, which, ironically, the NDP's range extends down to 1 and as high as 37, which is not great right now, but, geez, what's the NDP's strongest seat? That'd be a tough... one of our listeners have to write in.
Yeah.
It's going to be like a Sudbury type thing or something.
It could be. BC, it's probably the one one of the ones I live in, but...
oh, yeah. East Van,
yeah. Very orange. But, outside of Vancouver, not really sure on the...
So, yeah, I don't foresee the green wave. My other suspicion is, or at least was before this piece, is Mulcair angling for, a political comeback in a different jersey, and I was thinking maybe Team Liberal at that point. He'd been a provincial Liberal. Now maybe he's going to angle for the Green Party. Hell, maybe he's going to angle for the Green Party leadership. He was known as a champion of environmental issues in the Quebec legislature. Maybe he wants to take that federally and take another crack at it. Friend of the pod, David Mosscrop, has a countertake in Maclean's which says, basically, the fuck are you thinking, Thomas Mulcair? Go away and do like most former political party leaders do and be an elder statesman and not stir shit up.
Although, admittedly, I'm enjoying watching the searches of Thomas Mulcair stirring shit up.
It would be, I want to say it would be kind of more amusing if there was more Harper, but the last thing he did was the Ben Shapiro show.
It wasn't great.
Where he started talking about how free trade's bad now.
Yeah, I was curious enough to actually watch it, and that was a waste of an hour.
Like most Ben Shapiro episodes, I bet.
That's literally the only Ben Shapiro I've ever seen, so I can't really comment.
Well, if you want to come on the podcast, Stephen Harper, I'm sure we can find some questions.
But just general open invitation to former party leaders.
Yeah.
And finally, BC Place might be getting a new name as Pavco, I think the Crown Corporation that owns it, is looking to sell the naming rights.
I guess under the BC Liberals, they tried to do a round of selling off the naming rights for BC Place because just about every major stadium in North America has been sold off for naming, and why not? And the sale ultimately fell through. Now, this was at the time when they were spending a bunch of money redoing the roof, and that drew its own controversy. So they were hopeful that TELUS in this situation would pay, I think, $40 million to name it TELUS Park, and that would help defer some of the costs of that. I was listening to In the House with Rob Sean Von Palmer this week, and they were talking about how these stadiums always tend to lose money, and BC Place is consistently losing, like $10 or $20 million a year. And so if they did manage to sell the naming rights, at least it wouldn't be losing so much.
Stadiums in general are pretty bad investments.
Yeah.
Government should stop trying to subsidize them.
Yeah, I don't disagree. But they did raise an interesting proposition, which is BC does actually have a pretty broad sell off the naming rights to public infrastructure policy in that if someone wants to, they could make a bid on bridges or roads or hospitals. Hospitals tend to get named for donations, but they were trying to argue someone should buy the naming rights to the New Patello Bridge because it was a Liberal premier in the 1930s that it's named after, and why not name it after something else?
So Patreon stretch goal?
I was going to say, any wealthy supporters among our midst who want to help us either rename it the Politicos Park or, better yet, I don't know, Politicos Rapid Transit Line, help us figure this out and scrape together a few $1 million and we'll make a pitch. The cabinet also ultimately gets a decision to approve or veto any proposal, and there are rules against alcohol or other addictive substance sponsorships or naming, and a few others, which I don't think we qualify as, but I don't know, help put the podcast name out there. It'll be an advertising thing. It'll get us some news at least. Or at least tweet at us what company should we name BC Place for.
And that has been Politicoast. Find links to everything we talked about at politicoast.ca. If you're a first-time listener, make sure to subscribe and let us know what you think. Support the show, get early access to our exclusive Slack channel, and potentially get a stadium named after us by going to patreon.com/Politicoast. And if you have ideas for the show, feel free to send them to us. Our intro music credit is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikoff. Thanks for listening.